And I also think one of the great tactical reasons for writing a book is, well, for goodness sake, you have to write. If you're running a business in the 21st century, you are known and discovered by the content you put out into the world. So if you're writing a book, that's the engine of your content strategy. So absolutely. And you don't go straight to the finished chapter and put that up. It doesn't work like that. As I say, you go through that kind of expansive, engaging piece and you think out loud, and then you get feedback on your ideas and you see what lands, and then you create the book. And when you create the book, you've already developed a sense of being known in that space, and you've got people who are interested to see what you have to say.
This is the Ideas Lab podcast, where you can learn from great creative and entrepreneurial minds how to turn your ideas into original businesses, books, and brands. Because in a crowded world, it pays to stand out. This is your host, John Williams, best-selling author and founder of the Ideas Lab London. If you've ever wanted to write a book about some aspect of business, then this is a great podcast for you. Alison Jones is founder of Practical Inspiration Publishing, a pioneering publishing partner for businesses, and she runs the podcast, The Extraordinary Business Book Club, and she's had some fantastic guests on that. She is a veteran in the publishing industry with 25 years of experience with companies like Chambers, Oxford University Press, and Macmillan, and she is head judge on the annual Business Book Awards, which I am a category judge on. She's also author of This Book Means Business and several other books. And I wanted to find out what makes a successful business book. How do you even start writing such a thing? And what is the key to making your business book successful? This is a really fascinating podcast for anyone who's ever dreamed of writing that killer business book. Alison, thanks very much for joining us on the Ideas Lab podcast.
Oh, it's great to be here, John. Thank you.
Now, I know you from the fact that I'm a judge on the Business Book Awards, which is an annual event, and you are head judge. So you are the person who, well, what does the head judge do? I mean...
yes, I outrank you, technically.
You do, yeah. Overturn my decisions. But you're very good at it. And I'm impressed how you manage, the pressures of everybody, of this disorganized bunch of judges who are handing in things late and all that kind of stuff. It's good how you managed to produce something coherent out of all of it. But the Business Book Awards, perhaps you can say something about the Business Book Awards for anybody in a sentence that doesn't know about it.
So the Business Book Awards were founded by Lucy Macara, and she invited me to be head judge. I was very excited because I think, business book publishing is a sort of Cinderella of the publishing space. It gets very little attention, but actually I think it's where some of the most interesting and creative stuff is going on. So that's very much always been my space. And so as a head judge, really, you kind of get to boss the other judges around a bit. I don't do the initial round of judging. As you know, all the category judges come, and there's this huge, intense day in January each year where we get all the piles of books on the table, and the judges are looking at the quality of the submissions, because you have to sort of submit your application, plus the quality of the books, and they're shortlisting for each category. So I get to read out the shortlists, and then the judges take away the books in that shortlist, and each of them get read in depth by at least two judges. And in an ideal world, the judges in each category come up with their winner, possibly a runner-up if there's a lot of discussion, and that's fine. What really happens, of course, is that there's lots of questions. There's lots of, I'm not sure this book should be in this category, or actually, I think this, but they think that, and so I do quite a lot of arbitration and sort of making final decisions and so on. And then once we have the category winners, usually I read all of the category winners and make the selection of the overall business book of the year. This year I couldn't do that because one of my own titles was in the category winners, so I had to delegate that bit. But yeah, that's always a great privilege and great fun to do. Very hard job, but very, very enjoyable.
Which brings us on to the next topic. So you run a publishing company.
Say that again, sorry?
So you actually are a publisher yourself. You run a publishing company.
Yes. So I'm the director of Practical Inspiration Publishing, and we focus on business books and also some self-development. And
on top of that, you have this great podcast, which is the Extraordinary Business Book Club. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And
ridiculously long title, I now realise.
it's good though. And so I like how all these things fit together. And one of the things I will ask you maybe a little bit later is how you manage to do all these things, but they do fit together quite nicely. How does your publishing company operate? How does Practical Inspiration approach publishing business books?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So I've been in publishing all my life. So I started off literally as a graduate. I was for about a year, I was an author and a bookseller. So writing for Chambers up in Edinburgh and in Waterstones East End, which is still the best Waterstones. And those are the two pointy bits of publishing. So it was a great introduction to the industry, because you're the creative writer at the one end and you're the bookseller with absolute sort of, all you can think about is how you're going to sell this book to the public. So that there's a sort of idealistic end and there's the rank commercialism at the other. And having appreciation of both of those, what authors need to know, how insecure they feel, and what booksellers need in order to be able to make a sale. Both of those are really, really important in publishing. So I started in publishing in 92, I think, up in Chambers in Edinburgh. And I've worked with Oxford University Press and Reader's Digest briefly, which is a bit surreal, and Macmillan. So, big traditional publishing companies. And then in 2014, I was Director of Innovation Strategy for Palgrave Macmillan, and really just trying to grapple with how publishers should respond to the way that the world was changing. So information suddenly, we weren't the gatekeepers anymore. And there was a sense that, no longer was content a rare commodity. We were all drowning in the stuff. It was attention that was rare. And how do you navigate that when your whole business model is around charging for access to content? And open access was coming and everything. I sort of pioneered digital publishing back in the 90s. So I was putting all that stuff online, but behind paywalls. So it was really complex and fascinating and tricky. And then Macmillan moved all their offices to London in 2014. And that was kind of a decision time. Do I move to London, which I didn't particularly want to do? I had small children, we're settled in the countryside. Or do I do something different? And originally I was going to completely leave publishing because it seemed so broken and it was a good opportunity to get out, And I retrained as a coach and as soon as people found this out, all they wanted to talk to me about was publishing their books when I was doing business coaching. And so it's sort of Practical Inspiration was born, and it brings together those two passions of mine, which is publishing, because I still love, I get a real kick out of publishing good books and all the technical shizzle around that, but also the thing about ideas and helping people really express their ideas more clearly. And so working as a sort of partnership publisher, which is what I do now in Practical Inspiration. So we're saying to authors, let's work together on this. You treat it as a marketing expense. You treat it as a professional development opportunity. We provide all the traditional publishing infrastructure, not just the production, which is frankly the easy bit, but the marketing, the sales, the global distribution, the warehousing, to book the reps out to bookshops and so on. And actually, it's a much more satisfying way to publish because you've got the time and the space to really work on developing the text and to make it work for the author.
Right. And so where do you live now, just out of interest?
Live near Basingstoke because that's where Macmillan were based.
Okay.
But it's lovely. It's North Hampshire countryside. It's really pretty. I run a lot, and within a minute I'm out in open countryside, and it's a beautiful place to live.
Yeah, I was trying to work out if you were still up north somewhere. I know we shared a train once back from the Business Book Awards. So I can't remember where you said you were going. So so you didn't get dragged into London in the end.
No, in an entire publishing career, I've got 27 years or something in traditional publishing. I spent 10 months in London with Reader's Digest. I'm quite proud of that.
Yeah, that is pretty impressive. And so
Edinburgh, why Oxford, Basingstoke?
Right, yeah. So and then you started the Extraordinary Business Book Club podcast. Why did you do that? And you said you got a big passion for podcasts. I'd love to know more.
I have. Do you want the really good strategic reason, or do you want the truth?
I have a truth, I think.
So I was trying to write my book. This book means business, and it's the most self-conscious, crippling thing in the world to try and write a book about writing a book to build your business. And of course, I'm a publisher. I'm actually not an author first and foremost. I'm really good at supporting other people and giving them deadlines and holding them accountable. Terrible for myself. So honestly, I started the podcast to hold me accountable. So I thought if I tell the whole world that I'm writing this book, I'm going to have to write the damn thing. And also it was a great way to one way of becoming less self-conscious about writing your book is to see yourself more as a journalist, a kind of a curator, and somebody who's asking questions and researching and finding out about stuff, because it takes all the pressure off you. And so this was a great way of getting on really top-flight business authors and just being really nosy and asking them what writing looked like for them, and how they made their books work with their business. And honestly, I didn't really care if anybody listened. It was just all about that accountability and that a platform from which to do that kind of research. A reason to call people up and have that conversation.
That's a great idea. And very early on, you had Seth Godin on, didn't you? Who's an amazing author,
I've had some
13
incredible
bestsellers. Yeah. And I listened to that episode. I remember in the gym once, and it was really interesting. That was one where you finished your podcast and then you restarted. Was that the one? Am I remembering right? Where you finished?
You're right. It was hilarious.
And he said, "Well, we really ought to finish." And he goes, "Well, I'm not going anywhere.
I'm not going anywhere."
And he went, "Do you want to go on a bit longer?" Okay.
So I switched the mic back on, and we had a bit more Seth. Brilliant. But what I found is that actually a lot of business book writers, a lot of business people love talking about the writing of their book, because they spend a lot of time talking about the content. And of course, we do a bit of that as well, because I want people to understand the context. But they're very rarely asked about the process of writing, and they love talking about it.
Yeah, that's great. And how the podcast has helped, has it? So the podcast, it's just a strategic part of it was that it presumably it helps people to understand about practical inspiration publishing.
Yeah, so the post hoc rationalization argument for the podcast is that it's a brilliant tool for developing your network professionally and building a following and all that kind of good stuff. And that when people come to me to publish with Practical Inspiration or to the 10-day business book proposal challenge or for the book coaching stuff that I run, it's not a sales conversation. They're just like, "Oh, I love the stuff you do. I really want to work with you. Where can we start?" And for somebody who hates sales conversations like me, that's brilliant.
Yeah. And you mentioned something earlier before we started recording about the power of writing that I thought was rather interesting. So you're a proponent of writing as an act in itself. Can you explain that?
Yeah, absolutely. I found when you talk about business writing, and if you Google business writing, most people's assumption is that business writing is what you do once you're clear on what you're saying, and it's all about communicating it effectively and being persuasive and, writing reports or presentations or, books, that kind of thing, which is fine. That is absolutely, that expressive part is one part of writing. But writing's so much bigger than that. And one of the things that I teach people is free writing, which was a revelation to me when I discovered it, which was not that long ago, about 4 or 5 years ago. And you teach these people and they go, "Oh, why are we not taught this at school?" It's just amazing.
Can you explain it a bit for anybody who doesn't know it?
Yeah, so free writing, if you listen to Orna Ross on the Extraordinary Business Book Club podcast, she talks a lot about it as well. So that's worth hearing. And she taught me about that. She uses the acronym, she takes free and makes it into an acronym, which is fast, raw, easy, and exact, which I think is quite helpful as well. So the way I do it is I set a timer for literally 5 or 10 minutes, because actually, my hand can't do longer than that. I'm just out of the habit of writing longhand. And I set myself a prompt like, I'm really struggling to work out what to do about this, and I think the reason is, and you give yourself a kind of a starting point, a toehold, and then you start writing. So if you've ever written morning pages, have you heard about Julia? So I've got her surname now, it's terrible. But
Julia Cameron's, yes. So Julia her idea is to write 3 pages of handwritten text every morning, just flow of consciousness, whatever comes into your brain, including, straight out of I hate this, I don't want to be doing this any longer.
This is boring, la, 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 whatever is in and the idea is that you're just unspooling your thoughts onto paper. And that's a great creativity exercise. But if even, the most hard-headed business person, having that space, which is entirely private, completely judgment-free, it allows you to just follow the thought along. If all you're doing is thinking, the thought's going around and you lose it and then you're distracted and it's gone. But if you're unspooling it onto paper, it gives you something to hang on to. And even when you're distracted, you can come back to it. And then you can read back. And by the second page, usually, there's a kind of, and you can watch people doing it. You can see the physical shift in them. They go, oh, and they've got something, and they've got an insight, something's shifted. And you come out the other end understanding the issue differently and more deeply, and you have an insight that you didn't have before. You've made a connection that you didn't have before, and then you chuck it in the bin because nobody needs to see this, But learning how to use writing, which, for goodness sake, it's the most lightweight, cost-effective tool in the world. It's there at anybody's disposal, 5 minutes, and that's really powerful. So I call that the kind of the exploration stage. And then there's also...
But by the way, before we leave that topic, does it have to be handwritten?
I mean, hey, I'm not going to come and police you. I find it works better if you're writing by hand. There's something different about the neurological connection. That kind of hand-brain connection is quite powerful, and it's more kinesthetic.
Yeah, I actually use...
If you must do it on a keyboard, then it's better than nothing.
Yeah, I think when I tried to do the morning pages, I found it so irritating to be writing so slowly that the version I've come up with now is to use a website called 750words.com. So the numbers 750words.com. And then it allows you to just, for each day, it's encouraging you to write 750 words. And it takes about...
Isn't that Buster Benson?
Who is it?
Buster Benson, I think.
Is that his idea, or is it? I don't think
I'm sure he was involved in that. He was on the podcast a little while back, and because he's a big proponent of writing as a thinking tool as well. So we were absolutely on the same wavelength. But yeah, that was a great idea.
Yeah, and I really like that, and I use that quite often. I pay $5 a month to have the version. I think you can use it for free for 30 days, but $5 a month will get you the version that lasts forever, and you can look back at anything. Not what I ever do. And when I can't work out what I'm thinking, I write, because often it's like just a general unease or a sense of overwhelm or something, and I don't even know quite what it is. And in the writing of it, I can work out, oh, this is actually what's bugging me, or actually these are all the things that are on my plate. Well, no wonder I'm overwhelmed, but actually only that one is really critical. So like you say, it's a thinking tool, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think very few of us realize that you can use writing in that kind of completely personal way that nobody else needs to see. Because then you can suspend the critic and the censor, and you don't have to worry about getting the spelling right. You just have to do the thinking on paper. And actually combining that with drawing, diagrammatizing, those sorts of things are really, really powerful too. But it's amazing how we're just not really taught to do that. So most people don't think to do it.
Yeah, we're not taught to think, are we? We're not taught how to be creative or how to think. I don't know if school has changed since I was at it rather a long time ago, but I don't get the impression it's changed radically. These are the sort of things that should be taught at school, I think. So you were saying from that process, there's then another benefit of writing?
Yeah, so I sort of see it as a sort of 2x2 matrix. I tend to see a lot of the world as a 2x2 matrix. It's a really, really useful thing. So you've got that kind of unclear internal space, which is all about exploration, where free writing is kind of at home. And then the things that are still internal, but you're getting clearer. Perhaps Seth Godin's a master of this with his blogs. Actually, it's just that sense of just expanding your thoughts. So you take that, you just become more and more clear, but you're still really keeping it in a fairly contained way. And then there's the sort of external dimension. So when you're really unclear about stuff, but you want to expand it out, then things like research, talking to people, focus groups, formulating questions, those are all really useful activities to do in terms of writing. And then that final quadrant is where we kind of think of writing, which is the expressive quadrant. So that's the engagement quadrant. And then you've got expressive, which is much more, okay, I'm clear, I'm ready to engage with people. Here's the sales copy, here's the book, here's the report, here's the presentation. And that's that sort of, so everything's moving you towards that place. But the journey is absolutely part of the thing. It's not just about that output, because I think one of the best reasons for writing a book is the shift it makes in yourself, the mastery of the subject, the deepening of your own understanding of what it is you do in the world.
Seth Godin says something like, writing a book is hard. He says, I can't remember what it was, but it was a beautifully structured little piece of writing in itself. It was only like a paragraph. It's hard, and it makes you question yourself, and it takes time, and it's emotional labor, and you should write a book. Yeah, so he's talking about writing a book in particular. And he goes, because it makes you think through what you're really trying to say. And you can see by the quality of debate online that a lot of people don't really know what they're saying. They don't know quite what the argument they're trying to make, and they haven't really thought it through. And that's part of the process that you are going through. If you're going to write a business book, you need to think like, well, what is my standpoint here? It's not a brain dump of everything rattling around your head. It may start as that, but it has to take some form eventually and be a cogent argument for something. And that's a process you have to learn, and it's a great process to do. Seth also said, at one point, Google did an update and he lost half his traffic to his blog. And his blog is, a really well-known blog. He posts to it every single day. And he said it didn't really concern him. And he said even if his traffic dropped to zero, he would continue to write every single day. And there's something about writing for publication that's different. This is quite a different kind of form, isn't it, to what we were talking about with the free writing where nobody sees it. Possibly not even your partner or whatever.
Definitely not your partner.
Definitely not your partner. And then, this other form where you are deliberately writing for publication, whether anybody reads it or not. And I've been a fan I often recommend people blog out their nonfiction book, and you write it a blog post at a time, and people are horrified by that idea. But where do you stand on it? Can you see the value of it?
I'm totally with you. And I also think one of the great tactical reasons for writing a book is, well, for goodness sake, you have to write. If you're running a business in the 21st century, you are known and discovered by the content you put out into the world. So if you're writing a book, that's the engine of your content strategy. So absolutely. And it's not, you don't go straight to the finished chapter and put that up. It doesn't work like that. As I say, you go through that kind of expansive, engaging piece and you think out loud, and then you get feedback on your ideas and you see what lands, and then you create the book. And when you create the book, you've already developed a sense of being known in that space, and you've got people who are interested to see what you have to say. I think hiding yourself away in a room and writing a book is just not a strategy anymore for a business book, even if it ever was.
That is so true, isn't it? Because when I got a little bit frustrated when I used to run business book writing courses with Jack Burns, who I'm sure you know.
Yeah.
And it would be a bit frustrating because people would come to you and go, well, actually, I just need to go away and write it. And then when it's finished, I'll come talk to you. And I go like, you're going to fail. It's like, that's not going to work. It's almost definitely a recipe for failure because if you've never done it before, at least, it's likely to just result in you writing a book nobody wants to publish and possibly nobody wants to read. What you need to do is I would describe it as almost like a fractal thing. You need to think like, what is the book you're trying to write? And then what is the structure that's going to support, what's the argument you're trying to put out there? And then what is the structure that supports that? And then fill in the content for that structure. Something like that. I mean, it's not always that rigid in my own process. How do you recommend somebody approaches writing their business book?
So in the boot camp that I run, I do say to people, look, find your own way, because one of the things about that boot camp is helping you develop your practice as a writer. And not everybody's the same. Some people, I'm talking to Michael Neal, who's never planned a book in his life. He just sits and writes. Slightly hate the man.
Is that Michael Neal in the States?
Yes.
The coach, yeah, he's great.
Yeah.
Love his stuff.
The Inside Revolution or Inside Out Revolution, yeah. But the way that works for most people most of the time, and the way that I teach, but say, look, play with it, see what works for you, is that we get the table of contents, which comes out of the proposal, and then we drill down and we create a working table of contents, which is essentially the skeleton of the book, but go right down to okay, what is the core idea in each paragraph in this section? And you give it a kind of sense of, well, roughly how long is this section as well? Because until you have that, you don't know when to stop writing. But if you know that, if you know the shape, the skeleton, the structure of the whole book in detail, and roughly how long each section's got to be, you can write so much more easily. You don't have to sit down and think, is this the right thing to be writing about? Or, does it go here or does it go somewhere else? Or have I repeated myself? You can just get on and write. And that's a much more efficient way of writing, because you can then use 10 minutes waiting for a flight or something. You just got to do 300 words on this, and you can do it so much more easily, and then you can use it in your in what you're putting out in your articles. And actually the process of writing a book is good material in itself. The things that you notice, the trauma of choosing a cover, all of those things are interesting as well. I think when you're writing a book, it's intrinsically interesting creative enterprise, and people are attracted to that. So I think if you do go away and write your book without telling anybody, it's such a wasted opportunity as much as anything, even if you do end up succeeding, which, as you say, is less likely.
Yeah. But if you're going to come up with this lovely structure and then, fill it in methodically, which would be a very good idea, how do you come up with that initial concept, though, that says, I want to write a book about this? How do you know you've got a good idea?
Well, partly I was going to say, actually, it's kind of iterative because you do that structure out, but it's a living thing and it will change over time, and it should change over time as you write, because that's part of the reason for writing. But in terms of how you come up with the concept, I say most people just start with what they have the itch to write about, or what they know they can write quite easily at the moment. I'd say that's one part of it, but I'd say there are three main parts. One is your stuff, your experience, your expertise, your way of looking at the world, your fascination pile, the things that make you, the things you want to write about. Because if you don't want to write about something, frankly, it ain't going to happen. But then the other thing is, well, what are the people that you want to write for, which for most business authors is the people you want to work with. If there's a disconnect there, you've got a problem. What do they care about? What are they struggling with? What's an acute pain point for them? What do they come and ask you? What do they not get? What are they searching for in their own journeys? Because actually, they're the hero of this book. You're the guide. Donald Miller's got a great thing about that in How to Build a Story Brand. So what are they asking you? What do they care about? What's the stuff that they want to read about? Because there's no point you writing about stuff they don't want to read about. And then the final bit, which I think a lot of people forget, is the context bit. So this is the future, if you like. Sort of where are we and where are we heading? What are the trends that are coming up? I mean, for goodness sake, disruption is everywhere. How does that play out in that intersection of what you've got and what you work on, what they've got and what they're facing, what's coming up down the line that they don't even know they don't know yet, but, you can sort of point towards. So I think if you've got a book that sits in that intersection of those three areas, you've got it made.
And that's also, that latter part is important because it's going to help you with marketing. Because if you can say you need to read this book now, or if you can say to a journalist, people need this book now because this is what's happening. This is the book of the age. If you had a book coming out right now that was about, race, for instance, because of the recent protests, it would be like, okay, you want to make sense of what's happening, then read this book, and it's going to give an incredible force to what you're doing. Or similarly, if you're writing a book that was about, science's journey to truth and dealing with large scale public health issues like the coronavirus, which it's done a kind of patchy job on, unfortunately, with the WHO giving confusing instructions and so on. You could write a really interesting book about that. And okay, sometimes you only know that afterwards because what's in the news is a little bit late, but we can see the big trends. I mean, you can
see the big trends. And you can see how they play out in your space as well, which maybe more people aren't writing about. There's the books about the big topics, but then there's the opportunities around the edges for how those big topics play out in certain areas.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. So when you work with publishers, with authors, how do you work with them? So you've got a boot camp to help them actually write the book. Is that right?
Well, so I run about 3 times a year. Although I'm actually running one in the summer because I don't normally do programs in the summer, but hey, nobody's going anywhere this summer, so I thought I might as well. But I run a 10-day business book proposal challenge, which is brilliant. I mean, it's one of those ideas you have and you just think, oh, this is going to work brilliantly. And it did. And I've done it for about 3.5, 4 years now. And it's literally over 10 days, we just go through a book proposal, because everything that a publisher needs to know about your book, you need to know about your book. Who is it for? What problem is it solving for them? What's your marketing plan here? How do you put it across, in a succinct summary? So by the end of 10 days, you've got a book proposal, which in itself is great because then you can pitch your book. But more importantly, you've done that thinking. And of course, you have a table of contents. So each book proposal I run afterwards, I run a boot camp, which is only open to people who've graduated from that book proposal challenge. So you've built up this fantastic energy and trust and a sense of people being at the same stage, which is just dynamite then for the boot camp. So that's a 6-week thing of saying, okay, we'll start with that high level table of contents. We spend the first 3 weeks bottoming it out. What does that actually look like? What's the macro structure and what's the kind of micro structure within each section? What do we need to cover here? Doing lots of post-it work. and then we have a week off to recover. And then on the final half of the boot camp, it's all about the writing, and it's particularly about how you start using that content in your content strategy. It's also about the network strategy. So we have a kind of on the book strand, which is the strategic piece, and an in the book strand, which is the structure and the writing piece. I don't know if you know Michael Gerber's point about working on the business and in the business. So the on the book stuff, we're talking about your network plan, your mindset, your marketing stuff, a lot on marketing, publishing strategy, and the content strategy. So that's all the kind of stuff around how you use the book in your business. So those are kind of 2 core programs that I do. But I also, of course, work with people as a publisher, in which case consulting or coaching is part of that package, because I kind of can't help myself, so I might as well do it formally.
Yeah.
And that's where we start. Like you, my heart sinks slightly when someone says, "Oh, I finished the manuscript. I just need a publisher." And you think, "Oh, I wish you'd come to me sooner."
I know. Yeah. No, that's a really good idea, because starting with the proposal in your 10-day proposal challenge, I might do that actually, because Jacqueline's trying to persuade me to start thinking about book 4 now, which is actually a very good idea, rather than waiting until, a year from now. A year after book 3 comes out. So, the proposal challenge is a good idea, because like you say, what is it? It's kind of a marketing document, but you marketing yourself to a publisher.
It's a pitch. Yeah.
It's a pitch, but it's also a pitch to anybody else who might read it, because the same, if you can get that right, then part of what you've got to be able to do is explain it to the press or to a reader. And so those are the 3 audiences, really: the publisher, the press, and the reader. And if you can get that right and write a proposal makes people go, "Oh, wow, yeah, this is good," then that's a book worth writing, which is the opposite way around. So it's kind of opposite way around to those examples we've given of people locking themselves away in a bedroom and writing a book on spec. So, and you talked about marketing. You mentioned marketing in passing. What's your latest thinking in marketing books? Because that is very much where my head is going to now. Now the book's coming out in my next book is coming out from Pearson in July. So what's your latest thinking on how to market books, and what do you recommend to clients?
We've spent a lot of time recently working with the book sellers and the reps, particularly as bookshops have been closing. It's some really imaginative, sort of stuff with online supply. We've been offering bigger discounts to booksellers to help kind of, keep that up. Because for us, non-Amazon, the supply chain is really, really important, because these are the people who really, really care about books. So we do a lot, with the buyer's guides, with the information that goes out, with the metadata. Metadata is key. That's really, really important. So if your publisher isn't doing a good job with metadata, then you get onto it. And the book proposal is the basis of that. So it's really, really worth getting it right. So there's a sort of book trade bit of marketing that I think most authors, particularly self-publishing authors, don't really engage with or think about. They just think about Amazon. And Amazon's a big piece of the puzzle, but it's not the whole piece. Mm-hmm. So just get that out of the way. And the other thing is that actually, again, it's that long neck as opposed to the long tail that we were talking about earlier. That period while you're writing the book, that is the golden time to really build up the marketing for the book. Is the time to start building your community, your email list, to get people engaged with it, to get the website up, to involve as many people as you can. So, from the podcast, obviously you're sort of reaching upwards, and you're getting, well, it's like how presumptuous of me, but you know what I mean. You're getting people on who've got something to say about the topic. But you're reaching outwards to people in related fields, people who might want to run a JV with you, a joint webinar where you're talking about, Michael Gerber does this brilliantly. He does the kind of the e-myth for dentists, and creates all those little kind of relationships around it. And then there's the reaching, I'm going to stop using up and down actually, because that's not terribly helpful. But the building the community, it's like, who are the people you're speaking to, the people who are following you, rather than the kind of people who are perhaps, leading in their field that you're talking to at the higher level. So how do you build that up? Where do you build that up? Thinking about what suits you. So a podcast suits me beautifully. It wouldn't suit everybody. A LinkedIn group might be right for you, in which case, good luck, because I think they're really hard to do. A Facebook group, it might be IGTV. So it's about finding. You can't do everything. It's about finding the home for you and doing it really, really well, really consistently, and building up that the people who share your passion. And you can only do that with really, really consistent, good quality content. And then the book comes, and in a sense, that's you've done the bulk of your marketing, because there's people there wanting to hear it.
Yeah, and that will be a surprise for some people, that you actually need to start thinking about marketing before the book's published, and that is a really key thing. So you need to be out there, talking about the same things that are in your book, and maybe talking about the writing process, and, like you say, building a following around that, and people who are interested in these ideas, so that when your book comes out, you've actually got people who are ready to buy it. And
at the most crucially tactical level, if you want to do an Amazon bestseller campaign, it all depends on your email list.
So a bestseller campaign being pushing people to all buy on day one, is that right?
Yeah, you reduce the Kindle price to 99p or 1.99 if it's a very illustrated big file, and you coordinate as many people as you can to just purchase on that one day. It's not the algorithm for Amazon isn't quite as crude as the number sold in an hour. You'd think that is what it means, but it doesn't. They include previous sales. They sort of degrade the weighting of them. It's also to do with what, there's a whole, they're famously opaque, but the key element of it is, can you get enough people to buy it in that short period of time to put it to the top of a category? And it's tactical, it's crude, I'm not saying it's pretty, but it is effective. But it all depends on having a group of people that you can mobilize. And that really depends on an email list or a community like a Facebook group.
Yeah. I think a Facebook group is a good addition as well. And I know some people like to have a kind of launch team, which I've created, although I haven't really started doing much in there yet. But the idea is if people just like you and like your work and are willing to do help in a little way, like buy the book at a particular time, then or request it in a local bookshop, then that's good to have an army of people who are willing to do that. And
that's when the fact that it's a book really, really helps, because you couldn't do that with every product and every widget out there. But people really do love being involved in book campaigns. There is something really magical that, and culturally, we get excited about books, and we should. They matter.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, that's fantastic. And if people want to know more about what you're doing, when is the next proposal challenge, the 10-day proposal challenge? Is that what it's called?
Well, it's funny you should say that, because literally yesterday I just thought, you know what, I should do something this summer. So the next scheduled 10-day business book proposal challenge and the next classic running of it is going to be on the 20th of September, I think it is. And I can just give you a sign-up link for that. But I'm also going to be running a kind of summer, I'm calling it This Summer Means Business. It's sort of a nod to my This Book Means Business. And it's the proposal challenge followed immediately by the virtual writing retreat that I started running at the beginning of the corona crisis. So it's basically a month of 2 weeks getting a proposal nailed, 2 weeks after that with some support and accountability to do some actual writing. So hopefully by the end of the month, you'll have really got a long way with your book. I just have to work out how I fold the bootcamp into that, if I do. That's still a bit of a work in progress at the moment. But I think that that should be helpful for people who aren't going anywhere this summer and want to use the time really constructively. So that will start on the 20th of July and run through to, so basically the last 2 weeks in July for the proposal challenge, the first 2 weeks in August for the virtual writing retreat. Or you could do either or.
Yeah, okay. And your book is still out there, This Book Means Business?
I reduced it to 99p on Kindle at the start of the crisis, and I have kept it there because actually, it's selling really well. I just want people to use this time and this space if they have it. I mean, many people have less time and much less space than usual because they're homeschooling. But if you have got time and space and it's helping you kind of re-evaluate your priorities and turning you to write the book that you've been talking about for too long, then go and grab it, because it's still 99p on Kindle and will be for, probably till the end of the summer.
Yeah, no, great tip. And otherwise, where should people go to find out about you and the podcast and Practical Inspiration?
So there are 3 sites, I'm afraid. It's alisonjones.com, it's practicalinspiration.com, and it's extraordinarybusinessbooks.com for the podcast.
Good. Okay, well, we'll put all those links underneath. And thank you very much. It's been fantastic, Alison.
Great to talk to you.
Got to ask one more question, which I forgot to ask. How do you do all this? You have children and a partner as well. How do you do this?
It all works together. What I find difficult is prioritizing my own writing. So I have to get up after o'clock in the morning to do that. But doing the podcast feeds the content strategy, so that makes complete sense, and all the business development stuff, and publishing the books. I have a great team. Shout out to the Practical Inspiration team. I've got a marketing manager, production assistant. We use a great production and design team. We've got our reps. The team, when we all get together for our kind of twice yearly meetings, there's about 20 people in the room. So that's not all just me, which is great, because it takes a village to raise a book. But I think, it's that whole thing, when you do what you love, you don't ever really work again. I know that sounds really trite, but it's true.
No, well, that's basically the theme of my book. So I'm not going to argue with that. Yeah, absolutely.
True. Let's play.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks, Alison. I really appreciate that.
Great to talk to you, John.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Ideas Lab podcast. Please do subscribe. And if you've enjoyed this episode, it would be great if you could leave us a review. You can get links and details of everything mentioned in the podcast in the show notes, along with photos and video clips from many of our episodes. Just go to theideaslab.org/podcast.